So let me start, and Janet, really is an honor to have you here today. And if you, for our audience, could just tell us a little bit about what you see as the key trends and statistics that sort of put in a framework the kinds of challenges we're talking about today.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for including me in this very important discussion, and I really do commend the Aspen Institute for bringing this initiative to the forefront, and of course for having Monica Lozano lead it. It's a very important time and opportunity, I think, for the Aspen Institute to take a good and hard look and elevate this issue. So, you know, what you've heard often said is that demographics are destiny, and I think you've heard demographics be a theme already in the conversations that you've had today. And I guess it would just be important to note that it is very obvious that the growth and size of the Latino community is something that should be the focus of great attention. And what we see today is that 1 out of every 6 Americans is Latino or Hispanic. But when you look at the age group of 18 and younger, in fact, it is 1 out of 4. And if you were to look at states like California and Texas, youth under the age of 18 in California, it's 1 out of 2. Wow. So, you know, that just gives you a sense of the importance of the changes that have occurred. The growth of the Hispanic community in the last census that was done in 2010 revealed that we represented 50% of the overall growth in the population in the 2010 census. So you're seeing not only growth, but fairly rapid growth for most folks who are unaccustomed to seeing changes in their communities and in different institutions. So we have 55 million, 17% of the population, 55 million Hispanics, 17% of the population. But again, when you focus on youth, and I think it's important to also note that the remarkable part of that growth has been the community's youth. The average age in America is 37. But for U.S.-born Latinos, it is half that, 18. So again, you're seeing some importance here. And what I think is, for us, really important to convey is that these, the next generation of Americans and beyond is increasingly Hispanic. And the bottom line is that these children are our future. They are our future taxpayers, future workers, and future voters. And what's also equally important, I think, to understand is that there needs to be important investments now in these young people if we are going to expect that they can be full participants in keeping our economy a strong one and in helping us continue to further build this country. And for us, I want to make sure people understand that there are important gaps we should be addressing right now when it comes to this community, because we do have higher poverty rates and lower rates on health insurance than other children. And for many, the uncertain immigration status of their family members means often living in fear and with greater instability. But one thing I think is interesting in terms of those statistics to note is that most often people, I think, when they think about the Latino community in the country today, they aren't really clear about how many of that Hispanic community are American citizens. I would hazard to guess that not very many people here have a very good sense of that. But I will tell you that at least 75% of the Latino community are U.S. citizens. But when you look again at these children under the age of 18, 93% of them are U.S.-born children. They are Americans. And we need to understand that as we look at this community, they are not a separate part of who we are in terms of this country and its future.
Thank you. And Monica, you know, the Aspen Institute wasn't the only place looking to attract you as you were stepping down from your daily active management of all your business. Why is the Latino program like the one that you and Abigail are developing important now?
Yeah, well, thank you, Elliot. And Janet, I want to thank you for being here on this dais to share what is really our first inaugural event, which is the establishment of this program, and to have you here is important. I also want to recognize Grupo Salinas, Natalie, and Luis Echarte. Luis, of course, is on our advisory board as well. And Elliot, to answer your question, I think it really goes back to the panel that we just heard from. The Aspen Institute has such a broad network of activities that when you look at the demographic shift that is underway in this country, the one that Janet just described, and you attach to that also the changing nature of America's demographic makeup as a whole, which doesn't just mean that there are more Latinos being born in the United States, but it comes at a time when, in fact, the white population of America is aging. We just heard about some of the challenges that employers face in terms of being able to find skilled labor. Over the next 20 years, almost 70 million people will age out of the workforce. So when we talk about the young population that requires this investment and this focus, it really is putting these two things together. There are a lot of Hispanic organizations that are very much focused on elevating the status of Latinos in America, like NCLR. What we find at the Aspen Institute is that we're now able to bridge these communities, these populations, and collectively identify policy responses that we think will respond to these changing demographics. It could be in workforce development, it's in the community college initiative, it's in the programs that you're doing with early childhood education. So what Aspen brings is the ability to talk to influentials, to decision makers, to people who are committed to finding solutions for America, but may not necessarily have the deep understanding that an NCLR might have. So it really is the opportunity here to bridge these communities, to convene in the way that Aspen convenes. And we heard Janet say that it's really these grassroots solutions. It's solutions that come from people sitting together across the table from each other that may have distinct points of view, that may not necessarily talk to each other every day. And it is frankly the power of the Aspen Institute's brand and credibility combined with the growing power of the Hispanic community that I think creates just an enormous potential for us that frankly we don't find anyplace else.
Janet, in your statistical overview for us, you emphasized just how many of the Hispanics in the United States are U.S. citizens, and it makes me want to ask about the immigration issue, which we read about constantly. But is the Latino community, is it a one-issue community?
Well, in fact, that is not the case. You know, immigration is an important issue for our community. In many ways, it's a threshold issue, it's a driving issue because Latino families are in some way often affected by it because of their family members, because of their community members, their work environment. You know, it can be a touch point for so many in our community that it drives a lot of the issues. But in fact, when you poll our Latino community and you ask them what is the issue of most importance to them, oftentimes it's education, it's jobs in the economy, or even health care. I mean, and in fact, I know that that happens to be the case because in the work that we do at the National Council of La Raza, it often gets overlooked because we are out there as a voice for the community advocating for reform of the immigration system. We advocate for that reform because we know it will benefit not just the Latino community, but the country in terms of the economic benefits that we see that would occur with a reform system and fixing this broken system. But in fact, our work is driven through 4 key pillars that are education, health, workforce development and what we call community development. And in those pillars, we intersect programs and policies so that we are seeing on the ground what is happening in the area of education. So whether it's in the community-based organizations that are our affiliates, that are 501c3s, that sign MOUs with NCLR to be our partners on the ground, that are providing early childhood education, or maybe they're running one of the 110 charter schools that we sponsor that are serving 35,000 children, or maybe they're doing the after-school programs that we support through funding from foundations or from folks in the corporate side of the world. Whether it's any of those, education has been a focus for us. Healthcare, and promoting healthier lifestyles and making sure that we're getting that information out in communities at the local level and learning what are the big challenges at the local level so that we can translate that back, as one of the earlier panelists talked about, translate that back into what are the best policy recommendations. So we have promotoras de salud, health promoters, who are out there running various programs, helping give us the feedback that we need so we can translate that into the policy opportunities, or maybe it's signing folks up who need that assistance for the Affordable Care Act and understanding that they can't just go online alone. We need to make sure we're breaking through not just language differences, but cultural differences that would encourage them to be able to have that access to the changed opportunities that they can benefit from. And on workforce, oftentimes what we find is that if we can give folks just the right skills, the additional skills that they need to meet the workforce needs in their communities, that can be the bridge that can allow them to increase their wages, to have opportunities for economic mobility. But the last pillar is one that I think is ultimately one that we've had the most success in and has been very important. We call it community development, but it focuses on wealth building. And in fact, we've partnered with the Aspen Institute on the wealth building side to really showcase that while of course we want increased wages for our community, but we understand in the way that they're going to be able to transform economically their lives and their lives of their family is if we can help them acquire that wealth. So what are we doing to help them understand the importance of savings, but more importantly, the steps that they need to take to acquire property and own their own home or keep their home from being foreclosed upon. And we have hundreds of network of HUD certified housing counseling providers that are there in the community helping make sure that our folks have that opportunity to wealth building. And we put 75,000 families in their first time homes and have counseled over 500,000 families to make sure that they're keeping their homes and away from foreclosure. Those are all the pieces of work that we do on the ground, and they reflect the ways in which the Latino community, I think, can use that kind of assistance, but if given that assistance, can really be full contributors in enhancing their own economic mobility and opportunities to contribute.
So let me just pick up, if you don't mind, Elliot, because we did a lot of work in advance of actually announcing the launch of this program, and what we've concluded is that precisely the priorities that Janet has identified will be the policy priorities of our initiative. It is around economic advancement, education, and civic participation. And in fact, our idea is to actually go out and to learn and to listen, because when you look at the population shifts in America, not only is it that the Hispanic community has grown at this tremendous rate, but it has now moved across regions of the country that didn't typically have anchor population centers. So urban communities like Miami and Los Angeles and Chicago, et cetera, that are well established with great infrastructure to support the integration of immigrants. There are other regions of the country, like the South, for example, that have 300% growth in their Hispanic population, but don't have that institutional infrastructure. So we plan to go out and convene regionally, where we are working with local partners to identify what are their priorities and how can we bring Aspen nationally to help support their efforts. And let me just give you one example. And in fact, Janet and I were there together. Northwest Arkansas. So Arkansas is one of the states in the South that has the largest percentage growth of Hispanics in the country, 300% over the last 5 years. And yet it doesn't have that infrastructure. So when we went out and we talked with teachers and educators and community leaders, from an economic advancement point of view, the one thing that was just simply so clear was that the jobs that are available in Arkansas, driven primarily by the growth in the poultry industry, it's not just working in the factory, but it's the logistics, driving in and out. And so many of those newly arrived didn't have the credentialed license, the commercial license that was required for them to be able to move out of the factory and into a truck. And that one very simple aspect that was identified as a barrier to economic progress is now something that we can come back to and look at from a policy point of view and say, what does it take to help somebody take an exam to become a commercial driver, to move out of a factory and into a better paying job? And so it's that sort of activity that we can do at Aspen by going out and listening at the regional level, which I think is consistent with what you early on said, that we need to get out of Washington, D.C. and go into these communities and take the capabilities of Aspen into these regions where, in fact, if we can bring it together, we think it's a real win-win.
I mean, it's fascinating just listening to the two of you and then comparing it to what we just heard with the three panelists before. And there are many of the same issues. Right. I mean, what's important for the Latino community is what's important for all Americans.
That's exactly right.
But you know, also just harking back to the previous panel, Janet, I asked them, and you heard, to talk about, you know, some of the success stories. And we often read so much about the struggles of the Latino community, read so much about the immigration challenge in particular. But what are some of the stories of success that I think would also be very important for your program, Monica, to be able to talk about and educate the non-Latino American population about?
Well, I think one area where we've had clear success, even though there's more room for considerable improvement, but when you look at the Latino dropout rate in high school, we have seen that cut down by a half over the last decade, wow. Which for us, that has been a huge advancement. The fact that, you know, we have been able to at least make sure that our kids are graduating from high school. You know, a lot of our focus now can be on college readiness. But, you know, we have to continue to make sure and insist that we do have high standards in those high schools and that there are expectations for high standards in those high schools. And we've been very committed to the Common Core standards because we understand how important it is that our kids not be segregated out of the statistics when people are reporting out on the success rates for their school districts, that they need to have integrated all students and their success and not have separate statistics for whether it's Latino kid or other types of students in that. So for us, having seen some real success in the graduation rates from high school allows us now to focus on transitioning those kids into college and making sure that they can graduate from college. Again, more work to be done there, but that's been an important success story. And I think the other area where there's a lot of great opportunity, and we've seen great success already, but there still needs to be further investment. The fact is when you look at small businesses in this country today, Latinos are growing their small businesses at twice the rate as the average American out there. And within that group of Hispanics, Latinas are the fastest growing segment. And what we're finding is that they're doing that right now out of sheer grit and will to be successful. But what we've heard is if they can get some assistance with navigating the system early on, maybe perhaps a little bit of access to capital early on, they could really be quite successful in their stabilizing their small business and growing their small business. And we know that that means great positive outcomes for our economy here in this country. So I think the potential to see further success for those Latinos and Latinas who are trying to start their small businesses is there. We've seen a great success story already, but we could really, I think, have higher expectations for more success in that area as well.
You know, Monica, just listening to this, I can't help but ask, given the fact that you spent so much of your career in the media, why is it that most non-Latino Americans aren't hearing these messages, and indeed are hearing a very different kind of message, which is why everyone just associates the population with immigration, especially illegal immigration? Has the media been complicit in this lack of a full and balanced appreciation?
I think that's precisely right, Elliot. One of the goals of this program, and it has many, is to actually change the perception that the broader population has of the Hispanic community. Because unfortunately, if you were to look at sort of what they call general market media, it continues to position us as a community of takers as opposed to the contributors that we are. You know, Janet just mentioned the rate of small business establishment, the largest number of small businesses, the highest labor force participation rates of any population group in the United States consistently for the last 10 years. The highest labor force participation. So people just don't understand that $1.5 trillion in economic power in this, it would be 13th in the world if it was a country by itself. So those are the aspects of our community, those are the stories that don't get told. So our particular program actually has a fairly aggressive communication and communication strategic plan whose intent is to help work with journalists, with media organizations, with editorial boards, etc., to take this story. And we believe that coming at it from the credible positioning that Aspen brings to it will actually help to change some of these misperceptions. There continues to be a sense that you know, we're primarily illegal immigrants, undocumented, poor, not working, here to live off of public welfare, when it is entirely the opposite.
Let me just add to that, and I'll just bring you a little retrospective. And another reason why it's so important, like organizations like the Aspen Institute join us on promoting the issues that affect not just Latinos, but the future of this country. But it wasn't that long ago that some of you remember a Lou Dobbs, you know, every night on CNN, a cable news program that purported to be a news show, when clearly we were getting, you know, opinion-oriented stories. So much so that the AADL, the Anti-Defamation League, joined with NCLR to start documenting how these stories were being told and the percentage of stories that were being told. And what we found is over like 6 months of Lou Dobbs' show at the height of the immigration reform bill, 75% of his news stories were immigration related. They all had a negative tint when it reflected the impact that of the images that were presented on the screen nightly of how the perception, negative perceptions of Latinos in terms of the images, but also the words that he was using. The ADL called them code words for hate, in the way that they were suggesting that somehow Latinos were less than, conflating all Latinos with immigrants and suggesting that we were somehow not part of this country in the sense that they were denigrating us as humans in the way people would view our community. And they documented all of that. So does the media have a responsibility? Absolutely. But we worked with a lot of folks. We went straight to the news channel, the CEOs. But in addition to that, we went to the corporate sponsors of the advertisers on that program. And guess what? Slowly but surely, they did ultimately remove their sponsorship from Lou Dobbs' show, and we no longer have Lou Dobbs dominating a CNN type of show. He's in a different category now, but there's clearly examples of where the media more blatantly has misrepresented, I think, in a subversive sort of way, images that have been very negative of the Latino community.
I was just going to say, Elliot, our approach will be somewhat distinct. We're not an advocacy organization, and it really is about developing a space where we can put forward policy solutions based on the best thinking around the table. And so we will work collaboratively. Our goal is to co-convene both with other Aspen Institute program areas as well as with other organizations. And I think all of us together need to shape this message, and it's one that I think is really critical, and you and I have talked a lot about this. This is not about developing a program area at Aspen about Latinos for Latinos. This is really to help reach across to a broader society to help understand the connectivity that we have. It's inextricably linked. America's future will depend on this population, so we have to change those perceptions. We have to invest where necessary, and we need to create this sort of policy environment that identifies the problem and then puts forward solutions. And that really is the ultimate goal here.
Jano, as I said, we're so delighted that you're here. We're talking mainly about the Aspen program, but I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about your own organization and what it does and why it's so important for you to attach your passions to that organization.
Well, Monica knows firsthand about the work of the National Council of Raza. She was the chair of the board when I became president and CEO. For, I think, me, the mission of the National Council of Raza and CLR is a very, very simple one. It's to create opportunities for Hispanics in the U.S. And we do that in the different ways that I highlighted just a little bit earlier. We do that by intersecting our program and our policy work to make sure that we are capturing the opportunities to promote for our community to be able to advance and to be successful, but also identifying the barriers and the gaps so that we can address those, whether it's in education or health, workforce, or in community development. We obviously also deal with civil rights and immigration issues, but one issue that we have focused on in the last, I would say the last 5 to 7 years, has been on civic engagement. And you've heard a lot also today about advocacy, and I know Monica has said that that is not necessarily going to be a key outcome of the initiative here, but I think it's important for us to recognize that we have to use our voice and have to engage our community. Every year, 1 million Latinos turn 18. Every year. We have 1 million Hispanics who turn 18. The potential for those individuals to be registered, to be educated voters, and to vote on election day can only add to the already 10% of Latinos who represent already 10% of the electoral population in the country today that is Latino. So we can do more because there are other folks who can be eligible for citizenship who have still not applied, Latinos who are eligible in this country. And of course, we want to make sure that we're engaging these folks so that they can weigh in and hold our elected officials accountable, because more and more we need to see, yes, programs on the ground, but we need to make sure that the policies are changing that will address these important gaps or opportunities for the community, because in the end, that's what's going to be best for the country. And so we have focused a lot on civic engagement and understand how important that is, but we've done that because we see the potential for our community to make full contributions to the country and help advance this country that we care about. And for us, you know, whether you're a full-blown American citizen or an aspiring American, we as a country ought to be taking advantage of this demographic cohort particularly when you look at this younger and younger cohort, and making sure that we're making the investments. And at NCLR, that's what we try to do, is focus on where can we make the best investments, develop the best policy proposals, and have the best programs on the ground through our network of nearly 300 community-based affiliates that are serving Latino families every day.
So I just wanted to mention, because Janet talked about elevating this network of young people, and that's precisely one of the things that we're going to do here at this program. Two things that I would mention. One is the establishment of a Latino Leaders Program, because we need to identify and fill the pipeline. It's not just about doing the work on the ground. We need to make sure that we've got people who are moving into decision-making positions like the ones that are part of the Aspen family. So we will have a very specific Leaders Network program, and then the opportunity to bring people like Janet and others to Aspen programs. And again, thanks to Salinas, we now have a scholarship fund that allows us to identify individuals who can come to and participate in other Aspen programs. So the idea is that we begin to commingle our two communities to ensure that we've got the right voices at the table, and that we also have a very deliberate and specific program identifying and developing these leader networks.
That's one of the most exciting aspects of this, just to increase the ranks of Latino leaders across all aspects of society. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give everyone here an opportunity to comment and ask questions as well. And I'm delighted this is all being videotaped, as I think what we've heard is just a perfect demonstration of why we are so excited at the Aspen Institute to be doing this. So it's going to be a much wider audience as well. But questions, please. Yes, right over here.
So you talked about the graduation rates going up in the last 10 years. Are there any particular examples or reasons why you've seen that rise?
Well, I think there's been a big emphasis on parental involvement, and I think we've seen that through a lot of the programs that have been created in different parts of the country, where we're keeping the parents apprised, and they're actually going through very formalized programs to be aware of, to learn more about the students, their children's curriculum, to learn about what is being reported out in terms of the statistics for their success, and also to understand the importance of advocating for their children as part of the school districts and the changes that are made. So there's been more effort there. I do believe that as states, and I know this has been a little bit controversial, but as states have embraced the Common Core standards, there have been easier ways for us to track the success of our students that have been much more consistent. And I know that's sort of under scrutiny right now, but I think that has helped, and we have advocated for that. But ultimately, I think it's when the parents are going to their events with the students, whether it's the FAFSA filings, the financial aid applications. We have a lot more parents who understand why it's important for them to be there, learning how to apply for that financial aid. There have been a number of steps that have been taken to do that. But I think increasingly, one thing that we've been trying to educate our own parents about is the need for broadband in our homes, and having partners in the industry understand how important it is. When you look at the future, not even 10 years out, it's 5-10 years out, more and more these students are relying on having that access to broadband. Our Latino community, 53% of our homes do not have access to broadband. And if the success of our kids are going to be intricately tied to their ability to have that access, we need to make sure not only are we working with industries and partners, but that our own parents understand, just like they would invest in a refrigerator or a washer and dryer, they've got to invest in connectivity for their own homes. And so we've got a lot more work to do there, but I'm hopeful that, again, by many of the parental involvement programs that we've had, we've also seen an expansion in early childhood education. That we also know has been a key indicator of how successful a student will be. The more that we can get our kids in early childhood education programs, the more they've been successful. But the accountability and making sure our parents understand how they can hold the schools, the teachers, and the school districts accountable, being informed about their students' success and what's happening there has really been important. So, but we've got a lot more work to do.
Yes, Olivier, we have a microphone in front. Olivier is from Aspen, France.
Yeah, being from a foreign country, I just want to address the international dimension of the Latinos. You are explaining very well what you are doing within the United States, but Latino is obviously global, and the immigration problem you have addressed also. I wondered whether you have some links with the other countries of Latin America, Mexico, even Europe, about this question, and how do you see the importance, the growing importance, especially with the young people, of the Latinos within the world, and some of the key issues which you have to address at that level?
Great question. Thank you, Olivier.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel I have to tell you, we've not done a lot of focus around Latino students abroad or internationally. We've focused more on the domestic, and I think, honestly, I feel like the American Latino experience has been something that, again, needs to be elevated here as part of the future of the United States. And we have put a lot of our focus singularly on the U.S. and making sure that we are doing everything we can to help our young people and our families be successful and to promote the best opportunities for them. But I do know that we have a lot of partner organizations that have done some work here. David Ayon, who's in the audience here today, has been doing a lot with the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, and I know they focused on an education partnership, trying to create a Teach for America type of program in Mexico and other Latin American countries, and learning from each other about how we can best promote opportunities for Latino youth in Mexico or in other parts of the world.
So when I think about the megatrends, how is the world changing? And I ran a business, so that was sort of the way I focused my strategic thinking around it. It's globalization, it's technology, and it's the demographic shifts. Those three things. So the world gets smaller with globalization. It also offers great opportunity. Technology has completely changed, and why something like what Janet mentions is so critically important. And then coupled with this demographic shift, you know, this is the way that we have to think about where is the world going and how do we participate in that. And I think our program here at Aspen, the Latinos in Society program, very clearly understands that we have to have a connection to the rest of the world, whether it be through Aspen Mexico, which was recently launched, or we do it through Aspen Spain, which also exists, or we do it through the work that they have in Central America, a leadership program. So there are lots of ways in which we can take our work and think about it in the global context. Right now, as we think about just getting started, it's something that we're looking at, but we absolutely understand. And there is so much benefit. When you think about just the economic opportunity that comes from a constituency that may be born here but has roots elsewhere, the benefit that comes to us from the point of view of commerce and trade, from having a skill set that makes you culturally comfortable to exist and to even speak in multiple languages and to have that cultural competency, I think we have a tremendous amount that we can offer if we're able to harness that in this global context of the changing demographics worldwide.
Yeah, actually, Olivia, I was just thinking along the lines of what both Janet and Monica were saying. We actually could offer a great deal to our European Aspen partners by demonstrating precisely the kinds of things this program will be demonstrating to the American public about the great value this expanding demographic group and of immigration, because it seems that immigration is such a threat to so many European countries. I think perhaps with some joint programming and work here, there could be a different kind of understanding.
Yeah. I think there is that opportunity, and I just would add that when German Chancellor Angela Merkel was last here, I was invited to a small breakfast with her, with other women leaders. She was very interested in women leadership, but when it came to my conversation with her in that breakfast, she was very interested in understanding the integration and the immigration of immigrants in the U.S., and that there is a lot that could be learned from the U.S. if we can get it right, and we're on the track to getting it right. But if we can get it right, I think they are very eager to understand how is it that the Latino community has been able to integrate and be successful. And I think that there is something that we could offer at NCLR to other countries. We just haven't done that so far.
They have a major problem with integration of the Dobbs, and we have a major problem with integration of the North Africans.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm just saying there is something I think that can be learned. We just have not had our focus on sharing that experience, but I think we could.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time is coming to a close. I'd like to thank Monica and Janet for a wonderful conversation. Thank you, and good luck to the program.
Thank you.